the inside of the Cadillac might look a little bit different than it used to. So yes, what are we doing? Well, I decided that I wanted all my inside gadgets to work, and we took out the radio to see if we could get it working, and the clock. So the clock is a no-go because all the gears, there's some broken gears in it, so we can't get it to go. But the real thing I wanted to fix is actually this fuel gauge. So the fuel gauge always reads empty all times, and then randomly every once in a while it'll go all the way to full and then right back down to empty. So there's a couple things I need to do. I need to make sure that the gauge is grounded correctly. I need to make sure that I have continuity from the sender all the way to the gauge, make sure the gauge has power, and then make sure my sender's good. So the first test that I did was I hooked up a lead wire from the brown sender wire that comes from the gas tank, and from there I connected a second lead wire to the gas tank. So I'm going to check continuity between basically the dash and the tank, make sure the wire is still in good shape and make sure it's not broken. Alright, so I have the multimeter on ohms, and I'm going to go ahead and connect this half to here, and I'm going to connect this half to here. And you hear that beep? That means the wire is good, so it's either a problem with the gauge or a problem with the sender. Now I have this jumper wire hooked up to the pink power wire for the gauge. So put power to it. We're going to go to volts on the voltmeter. We'll put this to ground. Put that to ground. And then we will put this to power. So now I'm getting basically 12 volts to the gas gauge. So the gauge does get power and it does have continuity. Let me go ahead and show you guys. There it is, 11.6. That's pretty good because we've had the battery on and off for a little while, you know, testing all this crap. So it's going to be a little bit low. But yeah, I mean, it's got good power, it's got good continuity. So it's either the gauge isn't grounded to the dash, which I'm pretty sure it is, or the sender's bad, which I have a new one. Alright, the next test that we have is going to be a little bit different. I'm not sure it's going to work, but I have this power wire that comes from the glove box light. And what I want to do, you see how that lights up? Can you see that? Yep. So what that means is that this part of the dash is a good ground. I'm going to go ahead and now point this at where the gas gauge sits, behind in the gas gauge, through the underneath of the dash. And if it lights up where the gas gauge is sitting, I'm assuming that means that the gauge is grounded correctly, and the only problem we have left is going to be a bad sender. So let's take a look. Although I don't shock myself in the process. So I'm kind of scared of this this thing shocking the crap out of everything just because it's hanging right near some metal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I can't cover it like that. And then I'll put the test light on here and hopefully not die. So the gauge lights up. The dash lights up. So, I knocked you over. So when I use the test light on the gauge and around the gauge, it both lights up, meaning to me it's a good ground. And here's why I also think a ground issue isn't the problem, because all the other lights on the dash work. All the dash, the radio, oil, temp, everything, the blinkers, everything on the dash works like it should. So I'm pretty sure it's not a ground issue. I really think it's a sender issue, and I'm kind of glad I bought one, so we can go ohm that one out and see what it does. Alright guys, so we're back in the garage. I'm going to go ahead and show you this just because I think it's super cool. Here's the dash speaker out of the Cadillac. That was all these vacuum tubes and all this crazy stuff that I guess they couldn't fit in the radio, so they had to put it behind the speaker. But here's the radio. So when we plug it in, we're able to get power to these. They glow. Other than that, we have no idea what we're doing, so it's kind of just troubleshooting at this point. We haven't been able to hook up an antenna to it, so anyway, that's a video for another day, but I'm going to go ahead and show you. This is the gas tank sender for the Cadillac, and I'm going to show you guys how to test them to make sure they're good. So let's pretend you have an old one and you want to make sure it's still sending the right amount of reading to your gas gauge. Ooh. So it's easy. You're going to go ahead and take your ohm meter like this. You're going to set it to 200 ohms like that, because it's a really low ohm reading. You're going to take your black wire, which will be your ground wire. You're going to stick it here to the housing. Then you're going to take your red wire and you're going to stick that onto the end where the wire goes. Okay. So let me go ahead and prop this up for you guys. Maybe you can see it. Hopefully you can see that. Can you see that? Yeah, it says 1. Okay. So this is the gas tank all the way empty. So it reads 0.5. And as I lift this bar up, you'll see the reading go up. Up to, looks like, almost 34 ohms. So the resistance is changing as the float level moves, which will move your gauge back and forth. So what I'm thinking is the one that's in the tank now, it was a used tank, and the tank's good, but it makes sense that maybe this part isn't. So we will have to, what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to end up just seeing how many ohms it's reading right now and see if it's actually working. Alright everybody, I have rigged up a ghetto battery bench test for this fuel gauge. So as you saw, I got power to the gauge, I got continuity to the gauge, but when I hooked this new sender up to it in the car, it didn't work. So I went ahead and removed it so I can verify that this gauge has a good ground. So it's really simple. In the back you say it says ignition. That's where 12 volts need to go. I'm eventually going to hook that up to the positive terminal here. And it also says sender, which that green wire now runs to the sender. And then I now have both the sender and the gauge grounded to the same battery, so I know these grounds are good. So now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to hook it up to power, play around with that sending unit, and see if it works. So let's see what happens, shall we? So it did something. Alright, so I have everything grounded and everything like it's supposed to be, and you see that when I move this, it doesn't do anything. So it makes me think that my gauge is actually the problem. It might be the sender's a problem. I don't know what the condition of the one in the car is. So goes down to 0 really nice. Maybe I can repair the gauge. Alright, in taking the gauge apart, I noticed a couple things. One, these things seem kind of hot, like they got kind of hot. I don't know if that's an issue, but another thing I noticed is that this metal part, I'm assuming, will ground to here. And then that grounds to the dash, and then that makes the gauge work. But if you're not getting any kind of, continuity from here to here, it's never going to ground. So I did just now, I put one of the probes into this side of the gauge and then onto this, stuck it all back together, and I wasn't getting any continuity. So what I'm hoping I can do is clean this up a little bit more and then also clean up the back of this, stick it all together and see if it actually makes a ground, and then plug it all back in and see what happens. So I feel like one side's working because it brings the gauge to empty, but then it doesn't go back all the way up to full when I move the sender. Look at that. It's actually a different color. You can't really see that. It's turning brass colored instead of gray. I now have this backing plate just held on with my fingers, and I'm going to hold that with the other finger, and then I'm going to go here to the back of the gauge, and so now we have continuity between the gauge and the backing plate. So maybe I'll actually get a good ground and maybe the gauge will work. Let's see. So there's a possibility that this might blow something up. I don't know if that contact is supposed to be there like that, but we will see what happens. Did that do anything? Yeah, it did. Alright. Oh, you see that? Woo! So that right there is full. Oh, I'm so excited. That's awesome. You guys saw that. I know you saw that. Watch. So it's in full. Then you lower it down. Oh, I'm running out of gas. And right there is close to empty. Boom. So yes, it works. So the problem ended up being that this gauge was not grounding well because it had been corroded inside the gauge itself. Not because the dash was not grounded, maybe not because the sender doesn't work. I don't know. I just know this is a good sender that I bought. But here's the thing. I think I'm the first person to ever remove this gauge since 1956. So moisture will get to your gauges and make them not work. So maybe I need to pull my temp gauge out. I don't know. That's so cool. Look at that. So the plan's going to be put this gauge back in, plug everything in like I should, like it is, put it all back together, and then see if the sender that's inside my tank is working already. And if it is, I'm not going to bother to replace this. So there it is. That's so cool. Well, I went and tried the gauge when I got it in the car, and it didn't do anything. It acted exactly the same. So I ended up replacing the sender. So there's the old sender, which actually came with this used tank that I got years ago. I don't know if you guys remember that. But let's go ahead and see if the fuel gauge will work. So it should be easy enough. All I gotta do is turn the key on, and it should. Ta-da! So it works. So we fixed it. Only took like half a day, but it's fixed. So that's one less thing I don't have to worry about. I guess next will be the radio and the clock.